Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful queens. Grab your tea and get comfortable, because the story I have for you today is going to make your blood boil before it makes you stand up and cheer. She smiled right to my face while she poisoned my son's mind, turning the boy I raised into a stranger who looked me in the eye and told me to pack my bags and leave my own home. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I simply handed him one manila envelope and watched her perfect, greedy little lie shatter into a million pieces right there on my hardwood floor. My name is Loretta. I am 66 years old and a retired high school principal living in a beautiful, quiet suburb in Atlanta, Georgia. After losing my husband when I was just a young woman, I poured my entire soul, my blood, sweat, and tears into raising my only son, Desmond, completely on my own. I paid off our sprawling home all by myself and made sure that boy graduated college without a single penny of debt. We had a bond that I thought was unbreakable. That was until Desmond met Savannah. She presented herself as a sweet, accommodating young woman, but I noticed early on that her smiles never quite reached her eyes. Wanting to help them save for a house of their own, I opened my doors and let them move into my fully renovated luxury basement suite. I thought I was doing the right thing for my family, being the obliging mother-in-law and the silent provider. But I had no idea that my boundless generosity was the very thing she would use to try and destroy my life and steal my legacy. I lost my husband Calvin when Desmond was just a little boy in elementary school. A sudden illness took the love of my life away from us in the blink of an eye, leaving me to raise our son completely on my own. I was a young widow, but I did not have the luxury of falling apart. I had a child looking up at me, depending on me for his entire world. I worked my way up through the Atlanta public school system, starting as a middle school teacher, and grinding day in and day out until I became a high school principal. I poured all my grief into my work and into my child. I worked early mornings, late nights, and supervised summer school sessions just to keep us afloat. Over the years, I saved every extra dime I made to pay off our beautiful, sprawling brick home in one of Atlanta's nicest suburbs. I wanted a true sanctuary for my son, a multi-generational estate, where our family could plant deep, lasting roots. And I made sure of one very important thing. Desmond was going to get the best college education possible without the heavy, suffocating burden of student loans. I paid his tuition in full. When he walked across that stage to get his degree, completely debt-free and ready to conquer the world, I cried tears of pure joy. Desmond was my rock, and I was his. We had an unbreakable bond built on the mutual respect of a mother who gave her all and a son who truly appreciated it. He used to call me his queen. He would drop by just to have Sunday dinner, bringing me my favorite peach cobbler and telling me how much he appreciated every single sacrifice I ever made for him. I thought I had raised a strong, discerning man who understood the absolute value of loyalty and family. But that was before love made him completely blind. That was before she came into our lives and changed everything. Desmond met Savannah at a corporate mixer downtown. When he first brought her over for Sunday dinner, she presented herself as this exceptionally sweet, polite, and accommodating young woman. She wore a lovely, modest dress, spoke with a soft, sugary drawl, and brought me a beautiful bouquet of fresh hydrangeas. But the very moment she handed me those flowers, I noticed something that made my spirit feel deeply unsettled. She had a wide, bright smile, but that smile never quite reached her eyes. Her eyes were cold and calculating quietly. Taking inventory of my crystal vases, the pristine hardwood floors, and the sheer size of my dining room, I brushed off my intuition, telling myself I was just being an overly protective mother. When they got married, Desmond confessed to me that they were struggling to save up for a down payment on a house of their own in this crazy Atlanta real estate market. Being the devoted mother I am, I immediately opened my doors. I offered them the fully renovated, luxurious basement suite of my home, It was essentially its own massive apartment, complete with a full gourmet kitchen, a spa-like bathroom, and a private entrance. I told them they could live there absolutely rent-free, so they could stack their money and build a solid foundation for their future. For the first year, I was the perfect, accommodating mother-in-law. I respected their privacy and never intruded. I cooked large southern meals and quietly left plates for them on the stairs. I paid all the utility bills, covered the rising property taxes, and even filled their refrigerator when I noticed they were running low on groceries. I did exactly what mothers do, silently providing a secure safety net to ensure my son's comfort. But slowly, the dynamic in my house began to shift. Savannah started treating my profound generosity as a basic expectation rather than a blessing. I ignored the small, nagging red flags. For so many years, I had this constant feeling of walking on eggshells, weighing every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping to get a crumb of affection from my own son. I was the obliging mother-in-law, the silent provider who never protested when they treated me like I was invisible. I actively financed a comfortable life that clearly had no real place for me. I thought that by giving them everything, I was securing our family's long-term bond. I didn't realize I was just giving a viper a warm, comfortable place to nest. Savannah expertly wrapped her manipulation in a sweet, pleading voice she only used when she needed something. She would ask to borrow my credit card to pick up a few household supplies, and I would later discover charges for expensive designer shoes and luxury salon visits. When I gently brought it up to Desmond, he would brush it off, telling me that Savannah was just stressed from work and needed a little treat. He defended her constantly, making me feel like I was the one being petty and unreasonable. The wonderful son, who used to call me his queen, was now avoiding my gaze, making endless excuses for a woman who was slowly but surely draining my resources and breaking my spirit. I was entirely funding their lifestyle, completely unaware that to Savannah, I was nothing more than an obstacle standing in the way of her ultimate prize. It did not happen overnight. It was a slow, deliberate drip of poison disguised as southern charm. Savannah started coming upstairs into my main living area more frequently. At first, it seemed like she just wanted to help out around the house. But then my things started to go missing. My car keys, which I have hung on the same brass hook by the front door for 20 years, would suddenly end up on the kitchen counter. Important pieces of mail, like my retirement fund statements, would vanish from my desk and mysteriously appear tucked inside a stack of old magazines. Even my daily vitamins and my blood pressure pills. The ones I kept perfectly lined up next to my coffee maker would be moved to the back of the pantry or hidden behind the cereal boxes. When I would ask about these things, Savannah would look at me with these wide, innocent eyes and a voice dripping with fake concern. "Oh, Mama Loretta," she would say gently, tapping my arm. "Are you sure you did not just misplace them? You know at your age it is perfectly normal to get a little forgetful." I brushed it off the first few times. After all, I was a busy woman keeping a large home together. But then she started doing it deliberately in front of Desmond. I remember standing in my own kitchen looking for the utility bill I had specifically left out to pay. Savannah sighed dramatically, pulling the envelope from the bottom of the trash bin. She looked right at Desmond and shook her head with a pitiful look. "Desmond, honey, we really need to keep a closer eye on your mother," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "She is getting so confused lately." I felt a tight knot form in the pit of my stomach. I was perfectly sharp. I had managed a high school full of 2,000 students and staff for decades. I was not confused, but Savannah was expertly wrapping her lies in that sweet voice she only used when she needed something. The disrespect quickly escalated from hidden keys to condescending remarks about my overall competence. If I was cooking Sunday dinner a meal I had prepared effortlessly for 40 years, Savannah would hover over my shoulder criticizing my methods. "Mama Loretta, maybe you should step away from the stove." She would suggest putting her hand over mine, We do not want you burning yourself or starting a fire. It is getting too dangerous for you to handle hot things alone." She spoke to me as if I were a toddler, not the woman who had fed and clothed her husband his entire life. I had this constant feeling of walking on eggshells, weighing every word and every gesture, hoping to avoid another one of her degrading comments. I was becoming an invisible ghost in the very home I had paid for with my own blood and sweat. What broke my heart the absolute most was watching Desmond change. My strong, intelligent son, the boy I raised to respect his elders and honor his mother, was slowly falling under her wicked spell. Savannah would go down to their basement suite and cry these loud, fake tears. I could hear her through the floor vents sobbing about how stressed she was trying to keep me safe. She would tell him she was terrified I was going to hurt myself because my mind was supposedly slipping away. Desmond, completely manipulated by those crocodile tears and fake concern, started looking at me differently. The deep reverence he once held for me vanished. He no longer asked for my advice. He no longer saw me as the fierce, capable principal who raised him against all odds. He began treating me like a fragile, incompetent burden. I remember the evening I tried to set things straight. I sat Desmond down in the living room while Savannah was upstairs pretending to fold laundry. I told him that I was fine, that my mind was as sharp as it had ever been, and that Savannah was intentionally moving my things to make me look crazy. Desmond let out a loud, frustrated sigh and rubbed his temples. "Mum, Savannah is just trying to help you," he said, his voice laced with thick annoyance rather than love. "You're getting older. You're forgetting things. Why can you not just be grateful that I have a wife who cares enough to look out for you? It is becoming exhausting trying to manage you. Exhausting. Managing me." Those words hit me like a physical blow. I was not a person to him anymore. I was a chore. I realized then that Savannah had successfully planted the toxic seeds of doubt deep in his mind. She had orchestrated constant fake crises to question my mental health reading right from the emotional manipulation handbook. Desmond was completely convinced that his mother, the woman who sacrificed everything for his success, was losing her grip on reality. I sat alone in my living room that night, looking at the family portraits on the mantel. The realization washed over me like a bucket of ice water. My son had chosen her lies over my lifetime of truth. I was completely alone in my own home, surrounded by two people who were actively plotting to erase my autonomy. Things shifted from bad to worse when Savannah announced that her stepbrother Bradley was relocating to Atlanta from Florida. Bradley was a white American man with a slick, blindingly white smile, cheap cologne, and the kind of aggressive confidence that immediately put my guard up. Savannah claimed he was a high-level investment consultant, though I never once saw him actually go to an office. Instead, he started spending an inordinate amount of time at my house. Savannah would invite him over for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, treating my dining room like it was their own personal country club. From the very moment Bradley stepped foot inside my home, I felt a deep territorial invasion. He did not just walk into a room to sit down. He inspected it. I would catch him running his hands over my custom crown molding, tapping on the original hardwood floors, and measuring the dimensions of my living room, with his eyes as if he were an appraiser evaluating a property. He would openly discuss the skyrocketing real estate values in my historically black neighborhood, practically salivating over the equity I had built over 40 years. Desmond would just sit there, nodding along, completely captivated by Bradley and his supposed financial brilliance. Then came the subtle, poisonous comments. Bradley would lean back in my late husband's favorite leather recliner sip, the sweet tea I had brewed, and look at me with a sickeningly fake expression of pity. "Loretta," he would say smoothly, "this is a massive estate for a woman living alone. It must be absolutely exhausting for someone your age to keep up with all this heavy maintenance." Savannah would immediately chime in from the kitchen, using that cloying voice of hers to agree. Exactly what I was telling Desmond, Mama Loretta. We worry about you all by yourself on the main floor. What if you have a medical emergency and no one hears you? Each calculated argument was designed to make me feel incompetent, helpless, and completely dependent. They were acting as if my home, the sanctuary I had paid for with decades of early mornings and late nights at the school district, was a massive burden I desperately needed to be relieved of. They would talk right over me during dinner, discussing my future and my safety, as if I were not even sitting at the head of my own table, treating me like an invisible ghost who had already expired. For so many years I had walked on eggshells to keep the peace, but now I was watching two strangers actively plan my exit. The tension reached a boiling point on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I was wiping down the kitchen counters when Bradley strolled through the front door without even knocking. He walked straight into the kitchen wearing a smug grin that made my blood run cold. He tossed his briefcase onto my clean island counter and pulled out several glossy, brightly coloured folders. I did not have to ask what they were. Savannah quickly rushed to his side, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Bradley sat down, uninvited, and spread the materials out on my kitchen island, completely disregarding my presence as the homeowner. "Loretta, we have been doing a lot of research on your behalf," he announced smoothly. "Savannah and Desmond are deeply concerned about your declining memory. We found some fantastic state-run retirement facilities that specialize in elderly care. They have 24-hour nurses, Loretta. It is a much safer environment for someone in your fragile condition." I stared at the brochures, feeling a cold, hard knot form in my chest. Savannah reached out and tried to touch my hand with that fake tenderness she reserved for moments when she needed to manipulate a situation. "We just want what is best for you, Mama Loretta," she said softly. "You could make friends your own age, and with you safely settled, Desmond and I could take over the main house, so you would not have to worry about a thing." I looked toward the hallway, hoping to see my son step forward and put an end to this blatant disrespect. Desmond was standing right there in the doorway, listening to every single word. He refused to meet my eyes. He looked down at his shoes, shifting his weight nervously, choosing the cowardly path of silence. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. It was an agonizing realization that the son I had sacrificed everything for saw me as an obstacle standing between him and a comfortable life, financed by my hard work. There was the naked, unvarnished truth laid bare on my kitchen counter. It was never about my health or my safety. It was about converting my home into their property to finance their lives. I did not yell. I did not throw them out right then and there. I simply picked up my cleaning rag, wiped the counter right next to Bradley's hand, and walked away in absolute silence. I needed them to think they were winning. The house was unnervingly quiet the following Tuesday. Desmond and Savannah had gone out for a dinner date, leaving me alone with the heavy silence of a home that no longer felt like my sanctuary. I sat in my favorite armchair by the living room window, watching the streetlights flicker on. I reached for an old iPad I kept on the side table. I had lent it to Savannah a few months prior when her laptop was getting repaired, and she apparently never bothered to log out of her Apple account. I only wanted to read the evening news, but the moment the screen lit up and connected to the home network, a relentless stream of message notifications began pinging across the top of the screen. Normally, I would never invade someone else's privacy. I was raised to mind my own business. But the name on the message notification caught my eye immediately. It was Bradley. I tapped the screen and the entire text thread opened up before me. What I read in those digital bubbles made the blood freeze in my veins. They were not just venting about a stubborn mother-in-law. They were orchestrating a hostile takeover of my entire life. Savannah had sent a message saying Desmond was finally starting to believe the narrative that I was losing my mind. She wrote that all she had to do was hide my keys a few more times and cry to him about how stressed she was. Bradley replied with a chillingly calculated set of instructions. He told her she needed to start documenting these fabricated incidents immediately. He said they needed to build a solid case to have me legally declared mentally incompetent, which I knew was a classic maneuver used in elder financial exploitation. My hands began to shake as I scrolled further up the thread. Bradley laid out the ultimate goal with disgusting clarity. Once they had enough fake evidence of my supposed dementia, Savannah was supposed to pressure Desmond into stepping in as my legal guardian. They needed Desmond to sign over the power of attorney to Savannah under the guise of relieving his stress. Once she had the legal authority over my finances, their plan was to commit me to one of those cheap, poorly run state facilities that smelled of bleach and despair. But the final blow, the message that completely shattered my heart, was about this very house. My beautiful brick home that I had spent 40 years paying off. Bradley wrote that his real estate firm could purchase the house in an off-market cash deal for pennies on the dollar. He promised Savannah a massive cut of the profits once they flipped the property to a developer. Savannah replied with a string of laughing emojis. She typed that she could not wait to get the old lady out of her hair and finally enjoy the wealth she deserved. She called me a stubborn old fool who was sitting on a gold mine and refusing to die. I sat there in the dim light of my living room holding that iPad as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. The sheer evil of their plot was suffocating. I had opened my home to this woman. I had treated her like the daughter I never had. I had financed their comfortable lifestyle right under my own roof. And in return, she was actively conspiring to strip me of my freedom, my dignity, and my life savings. I thought about Desmond, my beautiful boy, the son I had sacrificed my youth to raise. Was he really so weak, so completely blinded by this woman that he would let her lock his own mother away in a facility? I realized then that they were using him as the perfect pawn. They were manipulating his love and concern for me, twisting it into the very weapon they would use to destroy me. The realization was a heavy, suffocating weight on my chest. I set the iPad down on the coffee table, and I cried. But they were not tears of sadness or defeat. They were tears of anger, of accumulated frustration, of years of silently endured humiliation. I cried for the foolish mother I had been, for the woman who had lost herself trying to be indispensable to those who considered her dispensable. I cried for all the times I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace while they plotted my ruin right beneath my feet. I had spent my entire adult life building this legacy, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I had survived the grief of losing my husband and the exhaustion of working double shifts to secure our future. And what was all that for? To be treated like a disposable resource in my own home. As the tears dried on my cheeks, a profound and icy calmness washed over me. The fear and the heartbreak evaporated, leaving behind a hardened, unbreakable resolve. Savannah and Bradley thought they were dealing with a frail, confused old woman who would quietly fade into the background. They thought I would just surrender the keys to my kingdom without a fight. They severely underestimated the strength of a mother who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. They wanted a war, and I was going to give them one they would never forget. I sat in the quiet shadow of my living room for a long time after reading those messages. I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to grieve the son I thought I had raised. When the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the top of the hour, I reached up and wiped the tears from my cheeks. I wiped away the hurt. I wiped away the vulnerability, and I wiped away the foolish hope that Desmond would suddenly wake up and defend me. In their place, a cold and calculating determination settled over my spirit. I was not going to give Savannah the satisfaction of a hysterical confrontation. I knew that if I yelled or caused a scene, I would only be handing them the exact proof they needed to show a judge that I was mentally unstable and emotionally erratic. I needed to be smarter than the vipers living in my basement. The next morning, I began the hardest acting job of my entire life. When Savannah and Desmond came upstairs for breakfast, I did not greet them with my usual sharp wit or firm presence. Instead, I moved a little slower. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction of an inch, and I kept my voice soft, compliant, and docile. Savannah immediately took the bait. She swooped in, taking the coffee pot right out of my hands, her voice dripping with that toxic, fake sweetness. "Let me do that for you, Mama Loretta," she cooed, looking over her shoulder to make sure Desmond was watching. "You just sit down before you get yourself confused and burn something." Normally, I would have snatched that pot back and put her in her place, reminding her whose kitchen she was standing in. But instead, I just offered a weak, vacant smile and nodded. I thanked her and shuffled over to the kitchen island, pulling out a stool and sitting down like an obedient child. I could practically see the triumphant gleam dancing in her cold eyes. She genuinely believed her psychological warfare was working. She thought she had broken my spirit. She thought she was steadily wearing down my mental faculties and bringing me completely under her control. By playing directly into her vicious trap, I was lowering her guard. Savannah and her slick stepbrother Bradley became entirely convinced that they were the smartest people in the room, completely unaware that I was watching their every single move. The most agonizing part of my daily performance was watching Desmond. The boy I had carried, nurtured, and sacrificed my entire youth to protect, was pulling further and further away from me with every passing day. He stopped asking me about my day. He stopped asking for my advice on his career or his finances. Whenever we were in the same room, he would look at me with this heavy mixture of pity and extreme annoyance. He treated me like a fragile, incompetent burden, rather than the strong, fiercely capable woman who had raised him. I would watch him from across the living room as he whispered with Savannah, shaking his head and letting out heavy sighs whenever I supposedly forgot where I placed my reading glasses or my mail. The pain of watching my own son choose a fabricated lie over his mother and her legacy was a deep physical ache in my chest. He was actively throwing away a lifetime of unconditional love just to appease a greedy, manipulative woman who only saw him as a tool to access my wealth. But I swallowed that bitter pain every single day. I smiled vacantly when they spoke down to me. I agreed quietly when they suggested I rest instead of handling my own affairs. I was quietly securing my important financial documents, safely locking away any paperwork that could accidentally expose my true intentions to them. I became the perfect, compliant victim they needed for their grand scheme to steal my home and my assets. Every false smile I gave them was another deliberate step toward my ultimate victory. They were digging their own graves shovelful by shovelful, while I sat quietly in the background plotting a checkmate that would destroy them. The very next morning, while Savannah and Desmond were still deeply asleep in the basement, I quietly got dressed in my sharpest Sunday suit. I grabbed my purse, my financial files, and my car keys, slipping out the front door before the sun even fully crested the Atlanta horizon. I drove straight downtown to the prestigious law offices of Mr. Arthur Sterling. He had been my trusted attorney and a remarkably dear friend of my late husband for over 30 years. I walked directly into his mahogany-paneled office, sat down in the heavy leather chair, and laid my evidence out on his desk. I told him exactly what was happening in my own house. I detailed the constantly missing keys, the daily emotional gaslighting, the hidden text messages, and their incredibly sinister plot to quickly declare me mentally incompetent so they could effortlessly steal my home. Mr. Sterling listened in absolute silence, his jaw tightening with every single word. When I finished speaking, he looked at me with deep sorrow, but also with a fierce, protective anger. He told me that this kind of elder financial exploitation was a federal crime and that we needed to build an impenetrable fortress around my life immediately. Our very first crucial stop was to completely and entirely neutralize their main weapon against me. If Savannah and her arrogant stepbrother Bradley truly wanted to falsely claim I was rapidly losing my mind, I desperately needed undeniable medical proof that my brain was still as sharp as a tack. Mr. Sterling arranged an emergency appointment with a highly respected neurologist and a top clinical psychologist. I spent 4 grueling hours taking every cognitive test memory exam and psychological evaluation they could possibly throw at me. I solved complex mathematical equations, recalled long sequences of numbers, and navigated intricate logic puzzles with absolute precision. When the exhaustive testing was finally over, the chief doctor smiled and handed Mr. Sterling a heavily stamped certified medical report. My cognitive function was not just normal, it was absolutely exceptional for a woman my age. I had the certified, irrefutable proof I desperately needed. If they ever tried to drag me into a courtroom and claim I was senile, a judge would laugh them right out of the building. Their entire foundation was successfully destroyed before they even had the chance to lay the first brick. With my mental competency legally secured, I marched right back into Mr. Sterling's office to aggressively protect my lifelong legacy. I was definitely not going to leave a single penny to chance. Under his strict legal guidance, I transferred the deed to my beautiful $1 million home and every single one of my investment accounts into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. I structured the documents so perfectly that neither Desmond nor Savannah could ever touch a single dime of my wealth, even if they hired the most aggressive lawyers in the entire state of Georgia. My assets were completely locked down, walled off, and fully protected from their greedy, grasping hands. But I was not quite finished yet. I sat down with my banker and systematically dismantled the invisible financial safety net I had generously built for them over the past year. I permanently cancelled the automatic bank transfers that covered their massive weekly grocery bills. I completely removed Desmond from my premium auto insurance policy. I officially cancelled the backup credit card Savannah had been secretly using to fund her lavish lifestyle. I cut every single cord that was keeping their sinking ship afloat. For 12 long months, I had been the silent provider unconditionally funding a luxurious life that had absolutely no room for me. Now and forevermore, the extremely generous bank of Mama Loretta was completely and permanently closed. I confidently walked right out of that bank, feeling so much lighter and vastly more powerful than I ever had in years. The heavy burden of blind maternal devotion was completely gone, replaced by a refreshing, powerful wave of liberation. I had successfully gathered my entire defensive arsenal. I was fully armed, legally protected, and entirely ready to watch their pathetic, fragile house of cards come violently crashing down to the floor. It was a rainy Thursday evening when they finally decided to execute the last phase of their vicious little master plan. I was sitting in my favorite floral armchair, quietly knitting a baby blanket I had started weeks ago. The house was unnervingly quiet until I heard the heavy thud of footsteps coming up from the basement stairs. I did not look up right away, but I could feel the hostile energy completely swallow the room. They marched into my living area like an arrogant, conquering army, completely convinced they had already won the war. Bradley led the charge, swaggering into the room with his chest puffed out, holding a thick leather briefcase. Savannah followed closely behind him, clutching her phone and wearing an expression of pure manufactured sorrow. And then came Desmond, my only child. The boy I had protected and provided for his entire life walked into my living room, refusing to make eye contact with me. He looked physically sick, pale, and sweating, but his jaw was set with a rigid, misguided resolve. In his right hand, he carried a small navy blue suitcase. My suitcase, the one I used for weekend trips. Desmond set the luggage down on my expensive Persian rug with a dull thud that echoed through the quiet house. He took a deep, shaky breath and pulled a thick stack of stapled legal documents from his jacket pocket. "Mom," he started, his voice cracking just a fraction before he cleared his throat and hardened his tone. "We need to have a very serious conversation about your future today." I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, giving him a blank, docile stare. I wanted him to say the words I needed to hear him say them directly. He stepped forward and placed the guardianship transfer contract directly on my coffee table. Savannah and I have been talking to Bradley about your recent memory lapses and your overall safety, he said, swallowing hard. We love you, Mum, but we simply cannot provide the level of 24-hour medical supervision you require right now. It is getting incredibly dangerous for you to be living independently in this massive house. I have already signed the preliminary paperwork to assume full legal power of attorney. We found a highly recommended facility across town, and we packed a few of your essential belongings. It is time for you to get the specialized care you truly need. The sheer magnitude of his absolute betrayal hit me like a runaway freight train. My own flesh and blood was standing in the home I bought and paid for, telling me he was legally stripping away my basic human rights. He was casually discarding me into a cheap state-run facility so he could hand my million-dollar legacy over to a pair of manipulative con artists. I slowly shifted my gaze from the legal papers on the table up to Savannah. She was standing slightly behind Desmond, resting her hand on his shoulder, in a fake display of supportive, wifely comfort. But the moment my eyes met hers, the mask of the worried daughter-in-law completely slipped away. Her lips curled upward into a chilling, victorious smirk. It was a look of pure, unadulterated evil. Bradley stood beside her, crossing his arms and grinning like a greedy vulture ready to pick my bones completely clean. They sincerely thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner today. They sincerely thought I was just a helpless, broken old woman with absolutely no fight left inside of my soul anymore. The silence in the room was so incredibly heavy that I could hear the faint ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I looked down at the navy blue suitcase resting on my Persian rug, and then shifted my gaze to the thick stack of guardianship papers Desmond had so cowardly placed on my coffee table. They were all standing there, holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. They expected the stereotypical reaction. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to throw things, to drop to my knees, and beg my only son not to lock me away in a facility. They desperately needed me to act like a hysterical, unstable old woman, so they could feel entirely justified in their wicked actions. But I did not give them a single drop of that satisfaction. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I sat back in my floral armchair and crossed my legs, looking at the three of them with a cold, calculating calmness that immediately wiped the smug, victorious smirk right off Savannah's face. I slowly reached down into the deep side pocket of my leather tote bag resting beside my chair. I pulled out a single thick manila envelope. I did not say a word as I held it out toward Desmond. He looked at the envelope with deep confusion, his hands trembling slightly as he slowly reached out and took it from my steady grip. "Open it," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that echoed through the quiet living room. "Read every single page, Desmond." He pulled the flap back and slid out the thick stack of high-quality color-printed pages. They were the meticulously captured screenshots of the entire text message thread between Savannah and Bradley. I watched my son's face as his eyes scanned the very first page. At first, his brow furrowed in confusion, trying to comprehend what he was looking at. But as his eyes darted back and forth across the printed text, I watched the color completely and rapidly drain from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, sick ghost. He saw the messages where his wife mocked him, calling him a weak, gullible fool who was entirely too easy to manipulate. He read the horrifyingly calculated plans where Bradley instructed Savannah on exactly how to hide my keys and my medication and to fabricate a fake dementia diagnosis. But the absolute worst part, the part that made Desmond's breath hitch in his throat, was the final pages. He read the explicit details of their ultimate goal. He saw Savannah's own words outlining how they would force him to sign over the power of attorney. And then he read the message where Savannah gleefully agreed with Bradley that once my $1 million home was illegally sold to his shady real estate firm for pennies on the dollar. They would secretly drain Desmond's entire joint savings account and leave him completely bankrupt. They were planning to abandon him the very moment the money cleared the bank. Desmond began to physically shake. The papers rattled in his hands as he looked up at Savannah, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute horror and shattering heartbreak. "Savannah, what is this?" He choked out, his voice cracking under the weight of her monumental betrayal. "What did you do?" Savannah lunged forward like a cornered wild animal. Her sweet, innocent facade instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of pure, desperate panic. She reached out with her manicured hands, frantically trying to snatch the printed papers right out of my son's grip. "Those are fake!" she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical, shrill tone. "Desmond, do not look at those. She fabricated them. Your mother is completely crazy. She's losing her mind and making things up to ruin our marriage." But Desmond held the papers tightly away from her, stepping back, as if her very touch burned his skin. He was reading her exact words, her distinct phrasing, her cruel inside jokes with her stepbrother. He knew deep in his soul that every single syllable printed on those pages was the undeniable truth. Bradley took a threatening step forward. His jaw clenched tightly as he realized their massive golden payday was rapidly slipping through their greedy fingers. "Listen to me, old woman," Bradley growled, pointing a stiff finger directly at my face. "You are not going to ruin this. You're going to sign those guardianship papers right now, or I swear we will make your life a living nightmare." Before he could take another aggressive step toward my chair, the heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed through the house, followed by the loud, authoritative turning of the deadbolt. I had intentionally left the front door unlocked. The heavy mahogany door swung open, and in walked my brilliant attorney, Mr. Arthur Sterling. And he was not alone. Right behind him walked two uniformed officers from the local police department, their hands resting casually on their duty belts. Mr. Sterling stepped squarely into the center of my living room, his presence immediately commanding the entire space. "There will be absolutely no documents signed here today," he announced, his voice booming with legal authority. "And you, sir, will step away from my client this very instant." Bradley froze, his arrogant posture completely deflating at the sight of the police officers. Savannah let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Mr. Sterling pulled a certified, legally bound folder from his briefcase. He looked directly at Desmond and Savannah with absolute disgust. "For your information, Mrs. Loretta is in full, complete, and certified possession of all her mental faculties," he stated clearly. "Just yesterday, she underwent comprehensive, exhaustive evaluations by a top neurologist and a clinical psychologist. Her cognitive function is exceptional. Any attempt to declare her mentally incompetent is entirely baseless and legally void." Savannah began to visibly shake, backing away toward the hallway. But Mr. Sterling was not finished. He turned a page in his folder. "Furthermore, I am officially notifying all of you that as of yesterday morning, this property and all associated financial assets have been transferred into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. Mrs. Loretta's wealth is legally untouchable. You will never see a single penny of her money." I slowly stood up from my armchair, smoothing the front of my skirt. I picked up a separate, crisp white envelope from the coffee table and handed it directly to Savannah, who flinched as if I were handing her a poisonous snake. "That is a formal 30-day eviction notice," I said, my voice ringing with absolute crystal-clear finality. "You and your possessions will be completely out of my basement suite by the 1st of the month. I have also permanently cancelled every single credit card insurance policy and bank transfer I was generously providing to fund your miserable, ungrateful existence." One of the police officers stepped forward, looking sternly at Bradley and Savannah. "We have reviewed the documented communications provided by Mr. Sterling," the officer said firmly. What you two have attempted to do here is called elder financial abuse, and it is a federal crime. The fact that you actively conspired to fraudulently commit this woman to a facility for financial gain constitutes a severe violation. We are opening a full, formal criminal investigation into your real estate firm and your actions today. Bradley's face turned ashen white. He realized in that very moment that he was not just losing a free $1 million house, he was looking at years in a federal penitentiary. He turned and practically ran out of the front door with the officers following closely behind him to take his official statement. Savannah stood frozen in the center of my living room. Her perfect, greedy little lie shattered into a million pieces right there on my hardwood floor. Desmond dropped the manila envelope. The printed pages scattered across the rug like fallen autumn leaves. He collapsed onto his knees right in front of me, tears streaming down his face in thick, heavy rivers. He reached out and grabbed the hem of my skirt, sobbing with a raw, guttural sound of pure regret. "Mom, please," he cried, his voice echoing with absolute desperation. "I am so sorry. I was blind. I was stupid. Please forgive me, Mum. Please do not do this. I love you." I looked down at the boy I had sacrificed my entire life to raise. My heart physically ached for his pain, but my spirit remained completely unbroken. I gently pulled my skirt out of his trembling hands and took a deliberate step back. I looked him right in the eye with profound sadness but crystalline clarity. "You allowed these people into my home, Desmond," I said softly but firmly. "You watched them disrespect me. You watched them pack my bags. You stood there with a guardianship contract ready to lock your own mother away just so you could live a comfortable life financed by my blood, sweat, and tears. True family does not plot the mental destruction of their mother for financial gain. I forgive you for your foolishness, Desmond, but I will never forget your betrayal. You made your choice when you decided my legacy was worth more to you than my life. Now I am making mine. I am already alone. The difference is that now it is by my own choice, not by your neglect." I turned my back on my weeping son and his horrified wife, walking gracefully out of the living room alongside my attorney. For the first time in years, my home was entirely mine. I left them kneeling in the wreckage of their own profound greed, surrounded by the most beautiful, absolute silence I had heard in decades. It was the breathtaking, beautiful silence of my complete and total freedom. In the months that followed that fateful afternoon, the federal investigation tore through Bradley and Savannah's lives like a Category 5 hurricane. Bradley's shady real estate firm was completely dismantled by the authorities, and both of them are currently facing serious prison time for attempted elder fraud. Desmond was left entirely broken, standing alone in the wreckage of his own foolish choices. He is currently navigating a bitter, ugly divorce, and for the very first time in his adult life, he has to survive without my generous financial safety net catching his fall. He calls me every single Sunday, begging for forgiveness and asking to come home. But I stand my absolute ground. I tell him that true respect must be earned back through time and entirely changed behavior, not just empty, weeping apologies. My beautiful brick home is finally mine again, filled with warmth and a sweet, quiet joy. I have found a profound freedom in my solitude. I travel when I want. I sleep when I want. And I spend my hard-earned money exactly how I see fit. My life and my legacy finally belong entirely to me. So I want to leave all of you listening today with a very powerful life lesson. Never let anyone, not even your own blood, mistake your motherly love for weakness. You can give your children roots and wings, but you must never give them the power to destroy your foundation. Protect your peace and protect your assets. You have earned the absolute right to live your golden years with unwavering dignity and profound joy. If you loved my story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, Where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? I read every single one of your comments, and they truly warm my heart. Stay blessed, my queens, and until next time, keep your crowns high.